Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to our general plan safety element update presentation. We're just going to give people a couple of minutes to see if additional people will be joining us today. So we'll start in about 2 minutes. All right. Good evening, and welcome to our introductory webinar on the Los Angeles County Safety Element Update. My name is Iris Chi, and I am with the Department of Regional Planning. I'm here today with my colleagues, Caroline Chen and Thuy Hua. While we're not able to gather in person today, I hope that these virtual events will facilitate easier access to information and promote greater collaboration amongst everyone. So before we begin, I wanted to go over some technical housekeeping items. This event is being recorded and can be accessed for viewing at a later time. Participants will be muted during the presentation, but we will have a Q&A after the presentation. So please type your questions into the Q&A box and we will answer those at the end. For the best audio experience, make sure your computer audio is set to internal speakers. If you are using a Bluetooth device, make sure it is connected and selected. On a mobile device, select call using internet audio. So before we begin with the presentation, we would like to know how you heard about today's webinar. This will help us understand the best method of communicating information to you in the future. So we will be doing that through a Zoom poll. So let us know how you heard. Was it through email, through our Safety Element Up website, social media, newspaper, or did you hear it from a friend or a colleague? So we'll give you some time to submit your responses. Okay. And it looks like the majority of the attendees heard about this event through email. Thank you so much. All right, so if you have any suggestions on additional methods of communicating, please type that in to the chat box and we'll make sure to take those into consideration for our next event. The purpose of today's presentation is to provide background information on the safety element and our project timeline. This webinar marks the beginning of our outreach, and we hope that today's webinar will provide you with the information and the context you will need in order to provide that informed input later on in our safety element update process. We will discuss the timelines and opportunities along the ways to comment at the end of this presentation. So in today's webinar, our objectives are to introduce the Department of Regional Planning and also describe our role in guiding development in the unincorporated parts of LA County. We're also going to introduce the general plan and the safety element. We'll be discussing what's new in the safety element update. We'll also be defining some terms such as adaptation, resilience, and the components of vulnerability. We'll be describing the relationship between the safety element update and the climate vulnerability assessment. And then we'll let you know how you can participate in planning how your community can adapt to climate change through this safety element update process. So the Department of Regional Planning is one of 34 departments in LA County. Regional planning provides the planning services for the unincorporated areas of LA County. And the work that we do here at Regional Planning aligns with the vision of the Board of Supervisors and also serves the residents of the county. Coordination occurs with other county departments to ensure that plans and programs are aligned and implemented effectively. The Department of Regional Planning is responsible for land use decisions in the 2,650 square miles of unincorporated land in the county. The unincorporated areas comprise 64% of the county's total land area, which spans from the mountains to the beaches, to the deserts, and also the inland valleys. For context, cumulatively, the land area of unincorporated LA County is larger than both the states of Rhode Island and Delaware. Unincorporated areas do not have their own city charters, so the local government is the County of Los Angeles. There are about 1 million people who live in these unincorporated areas, and some examples of those communities include Acton, 3 Points, Libre Mountain, Marina del Rey, Topanga, Rowland Heights, and East Los Angeles. So now we're going to go on to our second poll question. And this time we will be using the chat box function. We want to know where you're tuning in from. So please write into the chat box the name of your community or your neighborhood. All right, I see some answers coming in. All right, I see attendees from our unincorporated areas such as Florence Firestone, Altadena, Lake Los Angeles, and we're also seeing some folks who are tuning in from incorporated cities like La Mirada, Duarte. All right, thank you so much. Even if you don't live in one of these unincorporated communities, but you may live adjacent to them, or maybe you work in an unincorporated area. So we still want your input because you are familiar with the local area, and that information will help us with our planning process. So regional planning is led by our director, Amy Bodek, and the department has 4 divisions, each in charge of a planning function. One division oversees long-range planning, another is responsible for project permitting, a third is focusing on enforcing land use regulations, and then our 4th division provides essential GIS support. So here today, we are from the division that focuses on long-range planning. We're charged with drafting roadmaps and regulations for how unincorporated areas in the county will develop in the next decades. We're also responsible for ensuring compliance with state legislation that affects land use planning. So in recent years, new legislation have been adopted, directing modifications to the safety element to address climate change and hazard risk reduction. So we're going to be grouping those legislation into 4 topic areas. The first topic area is climate adaptation and resilience strategies. Senate Bill 379 requires local jurisdictions to develop climate adaptation and resiliency goals and policies based on a climate vulnerability assessment. So Caroline will be describing those requirements in more detail later on in the presentation. Senate Bill 1035 requires local jurisdictions to address climate adaptation and resiliency strategies in the safety element and update the data every 8 years. The second topic is evacuation routes. Assembly Bill 747 requires the safety element to identify evacuation routes and evaluate them under a range of emergency scenarios. Our department is currently collaborating with 3 other county departments to conduct this assessment. A second bill, Senate Bill 99, requires the safety element to identify residential developments in hazard areas that may be at risk because they have fewer than 2 evacuation routes. The third topic is wildfire mitigation. Senate Bill 1241 requires development in fire hazard areas to have additional wildfire protection. So we're going to make sure that the safety element update continues to fulfill this legislation by incorporating strong goals and policies for wildfire mitigation. And an example would be, perhaps local communities may be encouraged to adopt community wildfire protection plans to ensure that defensible space around homes are maintained to reduce that risk of fire. And lastly, climate equity will be addressed as a cross-cutting topic across all policies. Senate Bill 1000, which is the Planning for Healthy Communities Act, requires local governments to identify disadvantaged communities within their jurisdictions, and then include policies and objectives to reduce health risks to these communities. Many disadvantaged communities are situated in locations subject to climate hazards, such as flooding, wildfire, and extreme heat. And to ensure all the communities are resilient to these impacts, the safety element updates policies must prioritize the needs of these communities first. This diagram shows how new legislation is designed to ensure consistency across different plans and general plan elements. The diagram also shows that planning for natural and climate change hazards cannot be siloed within the safety element update. We have to make sure that there's coordination across county departments to ensure all relevant plans are developed with alignment in mind. So we've mentioned the general plan and the safety elements. So let's dive a little deeper into what they are. The Los Angeles County General Plan is a comprehensive long-term plan which guides fiscal development and conservation. It embodies the vision for how the county will evolve and the direction the unincorporated areas will grow in the next 15 years. So like a book, the general plan has chapters known as elements, which you see here in this diagram. And each element contains goals, policies, and implementation programs that informs the land use decisions that are made. So our focus here today is the safety element, and this element was adopted by the Board of Supervisors back in 2015 as part of the general plan. So there are 2 main factors driving the need for an update to the safety element. So first, the new legislation previously, that I presented requires that we modify the safety element to address climate change and hazard risk reduction. Secondly, we're observing and experiencing at greater frequencies how climate change is impacting our county. 7 of the 10 largest wildfires in California's history have occurred since the beginning of 2017. The Bobcat fire last year was one of the largest in the county's history. And, the heat wave back in 2020 resulted in the hottest temperature on record for the region. We had an extended drought from 2011 to 2017, and then that was followed by an extremely wet winter in 2016 to 2017. So these are all signs that the frequency of extreme weather events are becoming a part of our new normal. And, According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the range of published evidence indicates that the net damage caused by climate change are likely to be significant and to increase over time. So as such, we need to tackle the projected potential hazard risk by preparing our communities in advance. So the goal of the safety element is to reduce the potential risk of death, injuries, property damage, economic loss, and social dislocation resulting from natural and human-made hazards. So the safety element currently has 4 sections, which is seismic and geological hazards, floods, fires, and emergency response. I will provide an overview of each of those sections in the next slides. So the topic of seismic hazard also includes geotechnical hazards, along with earthquake or seismic. Earthquakes can cause ground rupture, liquefaction, and landslides. So more than 50% of the unincorporated areas are comprised of hilly or mountainous terrain. And the vast majority of hillside hazards include mud and debris flows, active deep-seated landslides, and hillside erosions, and also human-induced slope instability. Flooding in Los Angeles County can be earthquake-induced or caused by climate change. Large underwater landslides have the potential to generate destructive tsunamis along the coastal areas in LA County. Also, the inundation of water caused by a catastrophic dam or aqueduct failure can devastate large areas and threaten businesses and residences. There are about 103 dams in LA County that holds billions of gallons of water in reservoirs. And a seismic activity can compromise dam structure and result in catastrophic flooding. Climate change is expected to produce longer and more severe droughts due to higher average temperatures, as well as greater and more frequent floods from extreme precipitation. Global warming causes ocean temperatures to rise and glaciers to melt, which contributes to sea level rise. And increasing sea level rise can cause coastal flooding, especially during tidal events. So although fires are a natural part of our wildland ecosystem, development in these wildland areas increases the danger of wildfire to residents, property, and to the environment. The increased fire frequency is the primary threat to wildland ecosystems. And those frequent fires cause habitat type conversion and also encourages the growth of invasive species. Wildland fire threats are increasing in part due to climate change, and the rise in temperatures and prolonged periods of drought increases the fire ignition potential and also may increase the frequency and the duration of wildfires. Also due to the intensity of development, population density, and the difficulties of containment, the county must also devote major resources to controlling potential fire hazards in its urbanized areas. A catastrophic natural or man-made, or I guess human-made disaster has the potential to severely strain the emergency response and recovery capabilities, and it can profoundly impact the economy as well. The continued growth and development in LA County will significantly affect services like the fire department and the sheriff's department. So coordination amongst various county departments is necessary to ensure adequate emergency response. And that collaboration can also ensure that development occurs at a rate that keeps pace with service needs. So I've been talking about the terms goals and policies in this presentation so far, and that is in relation to our general plan. So strong goals and goals and actionable policies allow county departments to use and implement the general plan effectively. So for those who are unfamiliar with the terms goals and policies, we define these terms, and we'll also show how those two correlate to one another. So here we define goals as a general direction setter that expresses the community's values. It may be abstract in nature and is generally not quantifiable or time dependent. A policy is a specific statement or diagram that guides decision making. It indicates a commitment of the county to a particular course of action, and a policy may be carried out through implementation programs and or by direct application of that policy. Here we have implementation programs, and those identify actions for carrying out the policies of the general plan. Each of these implementation programs identify a lead or partner agencies, and also provides general timelines, assuming the availability of adequate funding. So here in this slide, you see an example of our current goals and policies in the safety element today. So this is for the fire section, and we have goal S3, which states an effective regulatory system that prevents or minimizes personal injury, loss of life, and property damage due to fire hazards. And under this goal, you'll see a couple of examples. It's not the complete set of policies, but an example of policies that are related to this goal and helps to implement this goal as well. These policies include possible development restrictions, initial consideration of climate change, since this was adopted back in 2015, and hazard risk mitigation as well. So, many of our goals and policies within the safety element directly influences how services are provided by other county departments. So here in this slide, you will see the different plans that are managed by those other county departments, and these plans relate back to the safety element. So our department works in coordination with those departments such as Public Health, Public Works, Office of Emergency Management, and the Fire Department to make sure that our plans, policies, and programs are aligned and coordinated. So now I'm going to be turning it over to Caroline to present what's new in the upcoming safety element update.
Thank you, Iris. So as Iris mentioned, climate change is upon us, and we know this from looking at historical trends and future projections. The goal of updating the safety element is to protect communities from the consequences of climate change by incorporating adaptation and resilience strategies. For this introductory webinar, we want to set the stage for the safety element update process by establishing a common vocabulary for the work we have ahead of us. As the safety element's purview expands to address climate adaptation and resilience, it joins the ranks of other climate-related plans in LA County, such as Our County Sustainability Plan, which is a visionary and strategic plan for achieving a sustainable and just LA County, and the Climate Action Plan. So what hazards are LA County facing? According to the LA Region Report prepared by the California Fourth Climate Assessment, we can expect more wildfires, extreme precipitation that can result in inland flooding, extreme heat, sea level rise that can result in coastal flooding, and drought. These threats are typically referred to as climate hazards. So this year has been challenging, not just because of the pandemic, but because of the climate hazards that we've experienced here in LA County. So we'd like to take a quick poll now, thinking back over the past year. What hazards have concerned you the most? If you have another answer that's not listed, please enter that in the chat. So we had wildfire, extreme heat or freezes, inland flooding, sea level rise and coastal flooding, or drought. 44% have voted. Let's get above 50, 50%, 55. All right. All right. So it looks like here we have 68% of you are interested or are concerned about wildfire, and 43% of you are concerned about extreme heat and cold, extreme temperatures. And interesting that 50% of you are concerned about drought. This is really good information for us because this will help us prepare our future presentations. And we have 5% interested in inland flooding and 3% interested in sea level rise and coastal flooding. So climate change can cause direct harm to communities where the hazards are located or near the hazards. But the original climate hazard can also trigger secondary impacts that cause harm to communities that are located further away from the original hazard source. For example, the Bobcat fire that started in the San Gabriel Mountains last year resulted in worsened air quality, not only in Los Angeles County, but in the counties of Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino. The secondary impacts of the wildfire smoke resulted in very unhealthy values on the air quality index. Examples of other potential secondary impacts include an increase of vectors such as mosquitoes that may carry West Nile virus, increased levels of ozone that are caused by extreme heat days, salt water that can intrude into freshwater wetlands and harm the wildlife and flora that call these habitats their home, and valley fever, which can be a result of increased dust and fungal spores that disperse when there are drought conditions. Now let's hear from you for poll number 4. Please let us know what secondary impacts you're most concerned about. Okay, so we see 36% have voted, going up. Okay, we're above 50, we're 54%, 59, 60, 65% of you have voted. All right. Okay, so 75% of you are concerned about poor air quality, and 60% of you are concerned about power outages. And this is also quite interesting. 18% of you are interested in are concerned about not being able to purchase insurance, which is something that we've heard from our colleagues up in Santa Barbara. And 10% are concerned about valley fever. So now let's define adaptation and resilience, since these are words that we've been using, and they will be the primary new component of the safety element. These terms are often used interchangeably, but they have slightly different meanings. Adaptation is the process of adjusting to climate impacts to reduce harm. It's an action or a series of actions. Examples of adaptation include maintaining defensible space, which is the practice of keeping the area around your home free of vegetation that can burn. Another is to protect your home by stacking up sandbags to keep out floodwaters when the heavy rains are expected. Oops. Yeah. So now let's define resilience. Resilience is the context, in this context, is defined as the capacity of a business, community, or natural environment to cope with and respond to climate impacts, while also maintaining the capacity to transform to meet future challenges. Put simply, resilience is the process of adapting well. Adaptation can mean getting a generator to cope with power outages when a public safety power shutoff happens. But it can also, another way to adapt would be to install solar panels and batteries. So when power goes down, the system can go into island mode and stay powered. And then you can reconnect once the grid is back on. The difference is the first solution will still release carbon from burning diesel fuel into the atmosphere and can also expose your family to carbon monoxide risk. The second emission-free solution will not contribute to climate change problems, which is the root cause of the hazards that we're talking about today. Building resilience can also be getting involved with community-led groups that focus on taking steps to adapt to climate impacts. So how does the adaptation planning process start? So we begin planning with climate adaptation and resilience in mind by asking the questions of what and then how much. We assess what climate hazards are a threat to communities, and then we assess how much the climate hazards will impact the communities. The Los Angeles County Chief Sustainability Office kicked off the process by starting the climate vulnerability assessment in October last year. The CVA effort is still underway, and you will have an opportunity to read and comment on that draft document this summer. After the release of the draft CVA, we will host adaptation workshops and ask for your involvement. And later, Iris will talk more about that timeline. So right now, though, we are in phase 2. So I will now describe what goes on in assessing vulnerability. So what is the climate vulnerability assessment? The Our County Sustainability Plan in LA for the LA region describes the 2 topics that the CVA will cover: social vulnerability and physical infrastructure vulnerability. Social vulnerability refers to how climate impacts will affect people and communities, while the physical vulnerability assessment will consider how climate impacts will affect public surfaces and facilities such as cell phone towers, water systems, and transportation systems. But before we move on, you may ask, what exactly is vulnerability? Climate vulnerability is, simply put, the degree to which a community is at risk of harm when a climate hazard comes into contact with that community. Communities with a high vulnerability are at greater risk of harm, and those with low vulnerability are at lower risk of harm. This diagram shows how exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity together determine the community's vulnerability. So bear with me. I'm going to go through each of these terms and then give some examples. My hope is that by the end of the next few slides, you will have a good understanding of what these terms mean, so we have a solid foundation for communicating and collaborating with each other moving forward. Exposure is the presence of people or assets in an area that may be affected by a climate hazard. An asset is anything that a community values. It can be an essential service, a cultural heritage site, a hospital, wildlife, a park. Examples of exposure can be seen here. Communities located along the coast or that are located in fire-prone regions or any area where climate impacts may happen are exposed. Sensitivity is the degree to which a subpopulation in a community would be affected if exposed to a climate hazard. So every asset, every community has its own sensitivity based on its inherent ability to withstand climate impacts. Some examples of sensitivity are some examples of people with higher sensitivity are people who rely on life-saving devices that require electricity. When a power outage, a public safety power shutoff happens, this can severely affect people who depend on these life-saving equipment. People who have chronic health conditions and who have chronic respiratory illnesses like asthma, as well as children and older adults who are more prone to heat stress, also have higher degrees of sensitivity to extreme heat events. So together, when you take exposure and sensitivity, then you get a potential impact. And I discussed that earlier with the primary impacts and the secondary impacts that can result from coming into contact with a climate hazard. Then we have adaptive capacity, which can help the situation. Adaptive capacity is how much flexibility an individual or community, any asset has to change and to cope with the climate impacts. Some examples of adaptive capacity are, joining a very active fire safe council, or living in a place that has a very thick overhead canopy from trees. So this means that a neighborhood could have greater adaptive capacity. There may be characteristics about this neighborhood that can protect inhabitants. It could also mean social, economic, institutional capacity, that there's a lot of social cohesion within a community and people could depend on each other during emergencies to notify each other of hazards that are coming their way. Or it could be awareness and perception and a willingness to change in part of community residents. So taking all of these taking all of these together, this is how we get to vulnerability. In general, there are two types of adaptation actions we can take, and that is to reduce exposure or to increase adaptive capacity. It's sometimes difficult to change the sensitivity factor. So the safety element update will build upon the results of the CBA. We will take these results and work with communities to develop strategies that would help communities become more resilient. The safety element update will also have implementation programs, as Iris mentioned, to carry out the policies and goals and to make them tangible in communities. So now we're going to have our last poll to kind of get an idea of what types of strategies do you think would most benefit your community? Please choose one of the answers that we have, or if you have another answer that's not listed, please enter that in the chat. So the choices that we have include strengthening building standards for new developments, streamlining post-disaster recovery processes, supporting community-based organizations to lead local resilience efforts, using design and site planning to mitigate climate hazards. And what example that I can give of that is maybe encouraging businesses to provide shade along pedestrian walkways so that pedestrians can have some protection from the sun on heat days. And also the last choice that we have offered is provide incentives for residents to retrofit at-risk properties. Okay, 55% of you have voted, 58, 60. Can we get up to 75, 65? Okay, maybe we're at 65. All right. So it looks like 32% of you are interested in providing that, are interested in incentives for residents to retrofit at-risk properties. And then 29% of you are interested in that the county support community-based organizations to lead local resilience effort. That's really exciting for us to hear. And then 13%, oh, there's like a tie, three-way tie for strengthening building standards for new developments, streamlining post-disaster recovery processes, and urban design and site planning to mitigate climate hazards. Great. Thank you. So the last point that I like to make, it's a very important point, is that from what you can see from how vulnerability is determined, different communities are at different starting points when it comes to vulnerability. Some climate vulnerable communities experience more exposure or increased sensitivity to climate change. They may also have less capacity and resources to cope with and recover from climate hazards. These disproportionate effects may be caused by physical, social, political, economic factors. For example, not all households have access to the internet or can afford high utility bills. Not everyone can make changes to their environment if they do not own the place where they live. So these factors include, but they're not limited to, class, race, sexual orientation and identification, national origin, community health status, and income inequality. We acknowledge these differences and are looking forward to hearing and working with you, listening to your stories, so we can develop adaptation and resilience strategies that work for you and can reduce the risk that your communities face and build resilience. As mentioned before, the Chief Sustainability Office's efforts to develop the CVA is ongoing, and they have been conducting public outreach. One story that has stayed with me from participating in the development of the CVA is how climate hazards are experienced differently by different community members. Nancy from Idaska told us a story of how domestic workers, day laborers, and restaurant workers are impacted by, or were impacted by, the Woolsey fire. Many of these workers in the fire-affected areas were monolingual Spanish speakers. However, during the fire, communication from LA County was mostly conducted in English over Twitter. The result was that many workers were unable to receive information about how to get to safety because of the language barrier and because they used different communication channels. So to learn about road closures and evacuation routes, the workers had to rely on news from other people. In addition, some of the homeowners asked the workers to stay so they could protect their homes, which further exposed them to harm. After hearing this story, we recognize that the county response can be improved, and we will address this gap. So now it is time for me to turn things over to my colleague, Iris, who will talk about the timeline for the safety element update.
All right, so that brings us to the end of our presentation. Let's see if we could get the slide with the timeline up. So yeah, so before we get into the Q&A portion of today's webinar, I wanted to go over the timeline for our safety element update. And we'll be showing you what our next steps are and how you will be able to engage with us and provide your input at different points of this process. And so here today, you're attending the intro to the safety element. And the purpose of today's webinar was to provide you with that background information and context and help set you up to be involved in the next steps of our project. The next opportunity to engage is by commenting on that draft climate vulnerability assessment that will be released this summer. The CVA sets a baseline of vulnerabilities so that your community is experiencing. So it's important that you provide your input so that this baseline accurately reflects the vulnerabilities that you experience on the ground. And after the draft CVA is released, we will start holding the climate adaptation workshops. That will also take place this summer. And these workshops are an opportunity to help shape the goals and policies that will be included in that draft safety element. So what we're going to be doing is workshopping ideas on what you as members of the public think may be the best adaptation strategies for your communities and allow us to develop a safety element that reflects the needs of your communities. We anticipate releasing the draft safety element in the fall. And at this point, your comments on the draft safety element will be to fine-tune the proposed goals and policies. The public hearings at the Regional Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors are anticipated to start in the winter of this year. All public hearings are great opportunities to provide, public comments. And, we hope that this webinar provided you with some useful information that heightens your awareness of vulnerabilities and adaptation. And, we ask that you start collecting your stories or your observations on how climate change is impacting your community. And, and then we invite you to join our adaptation workshop in the summer and let us know, how we can play a role in increasing your community's resilience. So now we're going to start the Q&A portion of the webinar. Again, please use the Q&A box to type your questions in so that we can answer some of them. So let's see. Okay, so I am getting a lot of questions regarding, will the slides be available online? And yes, that is correct. We will make sure to post a PDF version of our slides on our website. And that website is planning.lacounty.gov/climate. I think maybe we might just, I'm thinking the best way to send out this information, maybe by email tomorrow. Someone asked, is there an EIR for the updated safety element? So our next step is to conduct that environmental assessment for this project. And so we'll be providing the environmental documentation sometime in the near future. When the project goes to public hearing, we'll also release the environmental documentation as well. Let's see. We have a question. Will the update include earthquakes and fault movement? So yes, the update includes earthquakes, seismic, and geotechnical hazards. That is a requirement that should be included in the safety element. And as for fault movement, we will be updating the safety element to include any new fault zones that were discovered since 2015 when our last safety element was adopted. Let's see. We have a question. How will this plan impact other plans such as the Antelope Valley Area Plan? And will components of the AV plan have to be rewritten? So, first of all, we all make sure to make sure that our work across the different plans and elements are aligned. So we will definitely be looking at the AV area plan to see how it could align with our safety element update. And as of now, we are not sure whether the AV plan will be rewritten or components of it have to be rewritten. We will have to do that analysis first. Let's see. Someone asked where they can send follow-up questions they may have after this presentation. You can email us. Our email is climate@planning.lacounty.gov. Caroline, maybe we can go to the next slide that has our contact information so that you can, copy this information down. We also have our phone number and our website listed. Let's see. So we have a question. How will inequity between unincorporated communities be addressed? I think I might punt this question over to Caroline, as she is very well versed in the equity requirements.
Well, we definitely want to engage with communities that we definitely want to engage with those communities and find out how we could best support them. We think that a very good way to do that would be to partner with community-based organizations. So if you are from a community and you would like to engage with us, please send us an email and let us know. And also give us some ideas of community-based organizations that you think might be helpful for this work, this really important work that we can do together.
All right. Let's see. We have a question that's asking, what is the relationship between you and the Forest Service? I'm assuming this is the U.S. Forest Service, a federal agency. We don't work directly together since our county fire is responsible for managing wildfires or fire services in the unincorporated areas. But we do, make sure to consult with the Forest Service to make sure that whatever we propose in the safety element is also aligned with any plans that they have on their end. But we do work very closely with our county fire department, which also has a forestry division as well. Let's see. We have a question. How will you coordinate with LA City, South Coast AQMD, etc.? Usually the way we coordinate with our I guess sister cities or agencies, they do have a chance to comment on our draft safety element when it's released for public hearings. But I believe that the CVA that the Chief Sustainability Office is conducting covers the whole city or the whole county, not just the unincorporated areas. So I am assuming that there is much coordination occurring in that process right now.
The Chief Sustainability Office did hold a city summit in the fall of last year. And they also have representatives from like LA City and other jurisdictions on their advisory board.
Okay, let's see. We have a question that says, it's going to be tough to assess flood risk accurately with 40-year-old FEMA mapping. Will you be proceeding based on this out-of-date information, which significantly underrates flood risk? Caroline, do you have, yeah.
I could take a stab at that. For the climate vulnerability assessment, there will be projections of coastal flooding from using the USGS coastal storm modeling system from Cosmos. So we are aware that the FEMA flood maps don't take climate, they're not taking that into consideration. So, stay tuned for the CVA because it will have more updated information.
Okay. Let's see. We have a couple of questions asking, how will we be involved with CAL FIRE? And so, CAL FIRE, their planning division will be reviewing our draft safety element before it goes to public hearing. And so that review ensures that we are meeting all the state requirements that's required, especially for the fire section.
And if I can add, we've been in close touch with planners at CAL FIRE. We've met with them to talk about evacuation routes. So yeah, they're really great partners, really supportive.
Okay. Let's see. I'm going to go to the chat because it seems like there are a couple of questions coming in that way. Let's see. So one question was, how do the SEA, the significant ecological areas, align with the safety element update? The safety or the SEA's, the SEA program is actually implemented through our conservation and natural resources element of the general plan. But we do make sure that there is consistencies between the safety element and any other elements in our general plan. And so, we'll make sure that, any, goals and policies that we're proposing in this update will also align or not conflict with other goals and policies and the other elements as well. Okay. Okay, another question was that, we said that a goal is a direction setter expressing the community's values, and that a policy is a statement that guides decision making and establishing commitment of the county to a particular course of action. However, this sounds like there is not a connection between plan goals, which is what the community wants, and plan policies, what the county is going to do. Is that correct? And in other words, will the new plan policies, what the county will do, reflect the new plan goals, what the community wants? It seems like for this question, it seems like we have to make sure that we do talk to the communities that, that will be, affected by perhaps proposed policies that are presented, but we want to make sure that our policies do reflect what the communities need in order to adapt to any future hazards or climate change hazards. So I am taking a note, and I will make sure to contact communities who want to be involved in this process, and we could have a more in-depth conversation from there. All right, so it's 7 o'clock. We got a lot of questions, so I'm sorry that we're not able to cover all of them. But if you want to continue this conversation with us, please email us at climate@planning.lacounty.gov. I think at this point, emailing us is the best way to contact us, since we're not in the office at this moment due to the pandemic. And we'll make sure to touch base with everyone. All right, thank you so much for attending, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks.